Hi there, this is Michael Becker, and welcome to this episode of the Identity Nexus. The Identity Nexus is a podcast where we dig into all things about identity and how do we create an equilibrium state between the flows of our personal data and identity between individuals, enterprises, the government, and society at large. So with me today is Simon Wood, the CEO of Ubisecure. So Simon, welcome. Thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
And I'm super excited because I'm actually going to get to see you in person in about 2 to 3 weeks. So at our event that we're going to be happening in London. So that's going to be super fun. But let's dig into what we're here to talk about. And what we're here to talk about today is organizational identity. And this idea of what is organizational identity and why is it important and why are we talking about it now? So briefly, first, maybe you can say, who are you? What is Ubisecure? And then we can dig into the rest.
Sure, absolutely. So very briefly, you said Simon Wood. I'm heading up Ubisecure. Ubisecure is an identity and access management company operating out of the Nordics, been going for 20 years or so now. We have always focused on bringing value to digital identity for organizations and governments. We have a lot of government deployments across the Nordics, but bringing value to the usage of digital identity, but not just for individuals. And for a long time, we've always focused on digital identity being about individuals, about people, but bringing the value of organization identity into that as well. And that's something that we've been doing since 2008. But what we're seeing now, and partially driven by the great work that you're doing from the MEF side of things as well, is pushing that awareness, pushing that understanding of organization identity and helping people see really what can be achieved and really the value that it brings to how we can operate businesses, how we can interact, how we can transact online automatically and safely as well.
Yeah, and let me pause you right there. So I think you raised a really important point. Most of the society's identity management, personal data management, et cetera, has really been resolved to that individual. And in some respects, it's all, up until now, it's been about how do we actually identify an individual to be keeping companies or organizations safe? In other words, I want to know if you're a fraudster. I want to know who you are so that when you assert a claim, I know that you're allowed to get on that plane flight. I know you're allowed to buy that thing, that you're in control of that credit card. So a lot of identity up until now has been about enabling organizations to trust who they've been dealing with. I think what we're hearing now is we're now seeing a flip in the industry because we've kind of got that one nailed. And there's a lot of really great things happening with that and significant evolutions. But this new thing that's happening in this industry, organizational identity, is this idea of how do individuals know who the company is, right? With all of this massive amounts of fraud and engagements and who do we trust, who do we not trust, the ability for individuals, whoever they may be, that individual could be an enterprise, that individual could be Michael Becker, the ability for an individual to be able to, with great assurance, identify an organization and what the implications of that are throughout the entire value chain, I think is critically important. And that's really what we're talking about, no?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's even several different aspects beneath that as well. So there is absolutely the need to identify organizations that you're interacting with. Really simple example. If you think about the last, let's say, Amazon purchase you did, you had to log on to Amazon to allow them to verify you, to reduce their risk in the transaction. But you don't get any technical presentation of identity from Amazon beyond it looks like the Amazon website. Maybe you've checked your older previous orders. Maybe you haven't. There's no technical presentation of the organization identity there. But actually, organization identity is a broad thing in itself. So an organization could be a family, it could be a social club, it could be a contractual arrangement, or it could be a legal entity like an Amazon or like Ubisecure, for example, where legal entities are the kind of the highest value type of organization that exists, and therefore an organization identity for that kind of legal entity brings with it the highest value as well. And that covers across various different things that we understand from individual identity in terms of levels of assurance, levels of trust that you can put in that identity. And a family identity is a self-defined, self-declared identity. Whereas if we look at a legal identity, it could be defined through a standardized network, for example, the legal entity identifier. Okay. So there are different ways you can have that.
Yeah, and there's this concept of the source of truth or the root of trust. And I think that's really important. So if I'm Michael Becker and I come up and I say, I'm Michael Becker and this is my dog, Chloe, I am the source of truth for that knowledge that I'm my dog, that is my dog Chloe. But the question is, how does anybody verify that? Right? Let's say you walk up to me and you say, I'm Simon Wood and I'm the CEO of Ubisecure. Well, what is Ubisecure and how do I verify that? And how do I know you're Simon Wood and that you're part of Ubisecure? I mean, I trust you, but now I want to verify. And I think one of the important things in the internet world, and as we get deeper into pure digital experiences or increasingly more phygital experiences, that merging of physical and digital, the new model is really distrust and then verify. Right? Because there's so much fake news, there's so much spam, there's so much cybercrime. You know, this idea that I should actually, you know, it's what industry often will call zero knowledge trust. You know, I don't trust. What I do is I to your point, let the technology help me trust.
You verify always, yeah.
Verify always. I guess that's the other way to word that. So let's talk about that. Tell me about like in the case of like a government or you know, governments are legal sources of truth. I mean, can you give me the examples?
Yeah, so essentially, for a given jurisdiction, and we're talking about legal entities here. So you're some kind of legal person from a legal contractual point of view. A legal person is an organization, a Ubisecure, an Amazon, whoever. That point of registration, the source of truth for the definition of that identity is the local business registry where that business is created and registered and maintained. So in the UK, it would be Companies House, for example. Finland, it's PRH. US, it's state by state. So each state has its own business registry or even multiple business registries. There's often not just one. Germany, every single district has a business registry. So there are hundreds of business registries in Germany. So there's a whole collection of entities. And these are typically government entities providing that source of truth for legal entities. So that's where that definition point comes from. But a lot of those registries are very difficult to access. Some are very forward thinking. Some have got open APIs that allow you to query that and check that dynamically. Some of them, you have to turn up in person with your passport in hand and get a photocopy of the registration paper for the organization. That's the only way you can verify that organization. And of course, if it's online with APIs, that's great. But if it's an old-fashioned manual interface, that doesn't scale to online business, online trust, and ultimately verifiability of that identity. So there needs to be a mechanism that allows that to happen, that takes that source of truth, but allows you to decouple from that source of truth and still be able to refer back to it, but use that online in a generic way.
Right. Yeah. And so let's talk about that a little bit. So that's basically what Ubisecure does, correct? You are helping us, get to those identifiers. Maybe you can help us.
Yeah, absolutely. So within Ubisecure, we have two sides to what we do. We have a classical identity and access management side, which deals like things with SAML and OIDC, and essentially now what we might call classical identity protocols. But we also have an LEI issuing business, which is under the brand of Rapid LEI. An LEI is a legal entity identifier, and that LEI is a globally accessible way of decoupling identity, or decoupling, removing the need to access a business registry to understand that identity. So an LEI is a highly assured organization identity. As an issuing, as an issuer, we have to be first of all accredited, and we go through a fairly long accreditation phase.
Let me pause you right there, though, because I think we're now jumping to kind of an end state that I think would be helpful for the conversation. So first, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and so what we're looking at here is a slide from a PowerPoint we're going to review in just a minute. And this kind of recognizes Ubisecure and as this kind of organization that's been at this for quite some time on helping us manage organizational identities. Now, one of the things that you just brought up is this idea of an identifier and what that means. And and you just brought up this concept of an LEI. And again, this is a blog post was just put out by your head of marketing, Steve, and I just absolutely loved it. So I wanted to pull it up. So you referred to this idea of an LEI. So real quick, can you summarize for us that there's these DIDs and GLNs and DUNSs and BICs and
absolutely,
and there's other kinds of tokens too. So what's the difference between these different identifiers?
Okay, so well, first interesting point. This list, maybe apart from DUNSs, actually comes from the World Trade Organization. So one of the things that's happening now is a very strong push driven by the WTO for cross-border digital trade. And to enable cross-border digital trade, you need an electronic identifier to identify the organization so that they can be matched and participate in those online cross-border transactions. So this list of identifiers that you've got here comes from a white paper that they released last year. And in fact, you can see a link to that at the bottom of the screen at the moment in that blog post. But these are the identifier types that the World Trade Organization calls out as potentially suitable, useful, should be involved in the cross-border transactions. If we run through them really quickly, I won't spend too much detail. The listeners, watchers who are interested, they can obviously come and read the article and go through that.
Yeah, and we don't need to read it now. But the idea is you've got decentralized identifiers, or a DID, which is a WC3 standard for identifying, creating an identifier. You have GLNs, which is the global location number from GS1. That's primarily for barcodes, but also can be
so essentially it comes down to addresses in the global location number. So it's it's a way of encoding addresses. And an address often belongs to an entity, but an address isn't an entity, it's an address. But if you go through these, the global location number, DUNS, I think many people are familiar with DUNS as a numbering system, BICs. These are all entity supplied data. So all of the data that sits behind these isn't verified. It's provided by the target, the data subject of the identity. It's only the last two, the TIN, the trader identification number, and the LEI, where there is external validation of that identity that's there. And
that's a really important point, because that's what ultimately gives us assurance. Because the prior numbers are trust me, right? Yeah. Now, trust me that I'm Simon Wood and I represent Ubisecure, or I'm Michael Becker and I represent Identity Praxis. The former two are, well, I don't have to trust you because I can go check somebody that has independently verified you.
Correct. Yes, absolutely. So those last two are independently verified, which means that they become, by definition, highly assured identities based on the level of verification that's done. The trader identification number is used in customs departments across governments, but it's only available internally. So you or I don't have an access to look that up or to decode it and to understand what's behind that identifier. It remains an opaque identifier. Contrast that to the LEI. The LEI is public access. You can go to the GLEIF website, you can put in an LEI, and you can look up all the information around the entity itself, and all of the metadata around how it got there, where it came from, where it was verified, and so on.
Okay, so let me pause you right there, so people have a little bit of history. So GLEIF, the global legal entity identifier foundation, this organization right here, and we'll pop their website real quick. This company right here, GLEIF, this was founded around, I believe, in 2014 as a follow-on to the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. And it was and as noted here, the global G20 and the Financial Stability Board, basically the heads of money for every country, were saying, we need to be able to identify these banks. We need to be able to,
banks and organizations,
who these companies are and who they're dealing with. Right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So and with that in mind, they established GLEIF, which is a global Swiss nonprofit, for setting up the global standards and the governance for doing exactly what you're saying, this publicly verifiable method of identifying an organization. That's what GLEIF does.
So they give the operational oversight to that entire ecosystem. Yeah.
Right. And then what they also do is they oversee all of the different companies like yours that are given, and let's pop to your website real quick so we can show it, that are given this ability to be able to call yourself an accredited GLEIF issuer of LEIs. So GLEIF has established this entity that's been established by the global governments to be able to say, this is, and they worked with the ISO to set the standards for, this is how we're going to set up this numbering schema, to be able to establish these legal identifying codes, or legal identity, the LEI, legal entity identifiers. And so they're just governance then. And then what they do is they then accredit companies like you to then go issue these codes, correct? Or these
absolutely. So they're responsible for the governance, for the operational accreditation and ongoing audit. We have a yearly audit, which for us takes about 2 months. So it's a yearly audit that takes place. They also host the global database as well. So that's the other thing that they do that's critically important.
Okay. And let's come back to that in a minute. So if we go back to here and let's jump in. So there's different ways to get identifiers for your organization. And there are other identifiers too. These are just the ones that have been established by the standards toolkit. We referenced this event we're going to be doing later this month. But there's other identifiers that are coming from companies like Aegis Mobile that is doing that for vetting for messaging campaigns. And so they've got an identifier and token. Haya is another company that's created a certain type of identifier working with mobile carriers to be able to make sure that incoming and out, calls initiated by the company are actually properly identified and as being legitimate and not, say, a robocall. So there's a whole bunch of infrastructure out there in the world that are making these kinds of things happen. But one of them that is kind of starting to rise to the top is this idea of an LEI. And I think one of the reasons why is, as you said, is it's publicly accessible, it's globally recognized, it's cross-jurisdictional. I think are some of the other value.
Yeah, the other critical one is the high assurance. It's a highly assured identity. Yeah.
Okay, and so let's talk about that high assurance now. So what high assurance means is I don't just give you the information and you say, okay, great, Michael, thank you for that. You actually go vet it. You actually
absolutely.
And let's talk about that.
Yeah, so that's all defined in the governance framework for the LEI ecosystem. In that governance framework, it tells you the checks that we must do as an issuing entity on the data that's provided, and we have to go back to the original source of truth, which, as we spoke earlier, typically is the business registry for the jurisdiction that's there. We go back to that source of truth and we verify everything that you've told us about the organization. We potentially grab additional information as well, if it's available from the registry, and we augment with that. We then form that into the right data format that's needed by the GLEIF for submission, and then we submit that as the LEI to the global database.
So let's do that. Let's demonstrate that really quick. So for a quick demonstration of that, so there's this idea of a DUNS number, the Dun and Bradstreet number. So DUNS goes and creates companies, then I can go and verify myself. Yeah, that's me, and that's an unverified methodology of me, my DUNS number. A little bit different. So a couple weeks ago, I went to Rapid LEI, which is by Ubisecure. So this is in some ways, this is like registering a domain. It's you're a registry. It's a nice analogy for that. So I went to Rapid LEI and I went through the process of saying, here's my corporate identity number. Here's my name. By the way, here's my credit card because it costs, it's like a domain. It costs $60. At least it did when I did it at that time. And to get this highly assured identifier for my organization. So I went through that process and it took maybe a day or two. It was very, very quick because my company's small and such. Now, if I pop over to GLEIF and I paste in my identifier number, so this is a number that you have issued me when the process was complete. And if I go and search that now, I'm my company's identity practice, and now I have this global legal entity identifier, which then, as you pointed out when we were going through this process, has been fully corroborated. Yeah. And I think that's the point you're getting to, in that when we talk about assurance and high assurance, there's, what did you call it? ESO, entity supplied?
Yes, so there's entity supplied only. Partially corroborated and fully corroborated are the possibilities.
Right. And so in this case, when I went to go get my LEI, you're showing the world that my information about my company is fully corroborated. That this is, the source of truth, if you will, was the Secretary of State of California. That's my company number and the address of my business. So this is now let's talk about the benefits of this. Why do I want an LEI, both for my company and or for whomever I'm working with?
Sure. Yes. So right now, a lot of the use cases and the demands for LEIs actually come from regulation. So there are 300 regulations that either mandate or request the use of LEIs to undertake certain activities. So if you're doing any of those activities, you will have to have an LEI to participate in those. One of the first regulations was actually around share trading, which was to address the 2008 financial crisis. So now if you're doing any leverage transactions, so if anybody wanted to take a long or a short position against your company, but which hopefully nobody's doing that kind of thing, then they would need LEI data about the participants within that to submit with that position. But that's a fairly minimal use case at this point in time. What we're seeing today is a lot of the value from the LEI is coming from organizations who you work with. So for them, it's much more efficient for large organizations if they can have a consistent data reference across their organization for all of the partners, customers, suppliers, people they work with. And using the LEI for that gives those organizations fantastic returns. Couple of examples.
And so for example, too, rather than the ESO, the entity supplied only Dun and Bradstreet model, and a lot of companies will use that for like credit referencing and things like that nature. That's only as good as you trust that I provided honest information.
Exactly.
When you're doing it with an LEI model, it's being corroborated by an independent party, so that my funding, any branch relationships, any parent-child relationships that may be associated with that company can all be independently verified and accessible. And then that would allow the company to distribute that identity number throughout all of its supply chain, throughout all of its business systems, to be able to actually create a much more trusted, reputation-based, and independently verifiable set of credentials, if you will.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. So that is one of the primary use cases today. You mentioned about kind of the KYC side, AML side. In terms of understanding that identity from a large organization point of view, helping with that AML process, helping with that KYC process is a very prevalent use case right now, and we're seeing significant savings from that. Again, if you were to go back to the GLEIF website, there's a McKinsey case study on there that shows the value that can be extracted from doing this. I'm not sure exactly where they put it on there, but yeah,
somewhere we'll find it.
Search in there, then you can download a case study by McKinsey that talks through all of the value from KYC and onboarding from having an LEI as part of that.
Okay. Now, the other thing, so let's take a step back. So up until this point, we've been talking about what organizational identity is, the mechanics of and let's just reiterate it. So the different types of organizational identifiers that are out there, the mechanics of how you go about getting this new legal entity identifier, the LEI, and we do that now. And rapid LEIs, Ubisecure, there are tons more.
About 40 issuers out there.
Relatively tons. I mean, 40 is a lot of companies. So there's quite a few companies that are issuing these LEIs and making this whole process possible. But now I briefly want to jump here. So when we talk about the kind of what's the future and the benefit. So you've been doing this for 20 years.
Yeah.
And having this long number, alphanumeric string of numbers, I mean, it sounds great, but so what?
Yeah, exactly.
What's the tangible benefit?
Yeah. So the real value from this, when you for Ubisecure, for me, the value of digital identity is when you start combining things together. So when you take an organizational identity and combine that with an individual identity, when you start joining those two together, that's where you get real value. And of course, when you think about,
let's explain that. So the California State, Michael Becker, that's what organization. So California State, Identity Praxis, and Michael Becker, combining those three things together is what you're saying when you say organization and individual?
Or what, even just Identity Praxis and Michael Becker and a role that you have there. So CEO of.
Yeah. Okay.
So you have that combination. Now, with that combination, it allows you, as long as those are all highly assured. So if you have a highly assured organizational identity, you can trust the organization identity. You can have a strongly authenticated and highly assured individual identity. So maybe it's from your driving license, maybe it's from some defined process. I'm sure we'll talk about some of those processes in a moment, but defined processes to give you also a highly assured individual identity that can be usable online. When you link those together, you can now talk about representation. So you can now say that this this individual has the ability, has the rights, the capability to represent this organization to the following levels. And those are very, very fine-grained, or can be very fine-grained, and also they can be very variable. So just very briefly, we've spoken a lot about highly assured organization identities, but there are low assurance organization identities, and your rights change. So I am Simon Wood, CEO of Ubisecure. That is an individual in the context, a role with an organization. But I'm also Simon Wood, father of Louis. And that's a different context, a different relationship with a very different rights set, a very different capability. And those sets are not overlapping. You can't look at me as Simon Wood and understand what my rights are without understanding the context that those rights are expressed in. And those contexts vary by organization.
And again, I think the idea of representation and authority, I think that you brought up is really important. In that as the CEO, you can handle certain representations, you have certain authorities. As a parent, you have certain representations and certain authorities. And I think one of the important things too, and we're going to get to this in a minute, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but the verifiability of that. So let's park that for a second. But let's go now. I want to jump to a case study that you have here real quick. And there's a lot of words on this slide. We don't need to read them all, but let's just kind of talk through it. And in this context, in this case study, this is the Finnish government and a Finnish citizen that's paying taxes.
A Finnish company that needs to submit taxes. So this is still about organization identity from a legal entity point of view. Now, as I said, we've been doing this for a long time. This predates LEIs. As you said, GLEIF was formed in 2014. LEIs came into existence about 2016, give or take. This predates that. So we've been doing organization identity for a long time. Very, very quickly, because it is a slightly complex scenario, when you create a company, you have to pay taxes. The company has to pay taxes. You've got sales tax, you've got payroll tax, you've got corporation tax, kind of the world over. In Finland, when you do that, you register with the tax office. When you create the company's house automatically do that registration. The tax office comes out to you electronically through your secure identity, your strong national ID. They ask you to accept the rights to submit. But I'm a CEO, I've got a CFO who's going to do that. So I invite the CFO to that tax platform. I delegate the rights to the CFO using my strong identity as a national ID and their strong identity with national ID. The CFO has a team, he invites them, delegates to them. The team, maybe for payroll, they use an outsourced provider. So the outsourced provider is invited into that network as well. The outsourced provider is an organization, not an individual. So the organization has that delegated right for payroll submission, payroll taxes. And they then internally delegate to the right person who's doing that. So online, we've built this tree structure of rights and delegations that allow the submission of taxes. Now, the Finnish government is very transparent in what it does, and it records all of its data, and it publishes it, different sets of data each year. But in 2018, they published the stats on this system. And through putting that in place, they were able to achieve a 99% reduction in the cost of processing those tax submissions. That's what having that delegation linking together strongly authenticated individuals and highly assured organizations, that's what was achieved there. But of course, this was in the context of Finland, where they had, the company's house was online with its own local identifier, couldn't work outside of Finland. It was stuck within that national border, but it shows you the power of organization identity there.
Yeah, so we've proven that this can work within a context when elements of it are under control. But as we now start going more global, as we start crossing borders, as we start crossing jurisdictions, things can get a lot more complicated, and that's where the LEI comes in. This ability to have global, jurisdiction independent, channel independent, physical digital identifier that is highly assured.
Exactly. That's exactly what it does. So the LEI coming into existence and becoming more and more commonplace now is enabling that type of proposition to be taken well beyond Finland, the Nordics, globally, and everyone to start receiving those benefits. And that is just one point example of the sort of benefits, the sort of savings you can get through having that type of system.
Yeah, and the world's going to be fundamentally shifting and changing. And again, we alluded to this event we're going to be doing together in a couple of months. Or excuse me, a couple of weeks. But this is growing and growing quickly. And if I pop back to the LEI site, there's also this concept of a vLEI. And let's kind of wrap it up on this, and then we can and revisit this at future times. So the LEI is a legal entity identifier, and a vLEI is a verifiable legal entity identifier. In other words, if someone has been issued a vLEI, and today, as of right now, what's the date today? May 3rd, 2023. There is only one globally recognized vLEI provider, which is a company called Prominent.
Yep.
There will be more. Just Prominent happens to be the first one. And what the vLEI does is once you Ubisecure under with Rapid LEI has issued me my LEI, I can go to Prominent and have or request to have Prominent issue me a vLEI.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
When that vLEI is issued, I then can assert claims about myself. I'm the CEO of Identity Praxis. I'm the founder of Identity Praxis. And I have the authority to be able to do X. The company has bestowed upon me the authority to be able to do X, Y, or Z. And when I assert that claim, any party I assert that claim to will be able to cryptographically verify that my identity, my assertion, and my asserted authority, the claim of the authority that I've put out there without any human intervention.
Correct. So the vLEI basically brings the LEI into the current generation of containment, if you like, verifiable credentials, becoming phenomenal growth in use cases and existence and availability of different types of verifiable credentials. So a verifiable credential is a set of claims wrapped up inside an assigned, sometimes encrypted, it may or may not be encrypted, but certainly a signed block. So you can tell that they are genuine, untampered, and you can understand who actually issued those, who was the issuer that generated that set. The vLEI ecosystem has a very comprehensive governance framework around it, which defines the individual authentication levels that must be implemented. So for vLEIs, it's NIST IL2 to understand the individual. So we have to do passport verification, photographic national ID type identification on there for the individual. And then not only can we put LEIs into the verifiable credential to generate a vLEI, but we can also put official organization roles. So for example, Michael, you are the CEO. We could issue an OOR, an official organization role that says you as this verified individual carry this role with respect to this organization described by this vLEI here for Identity Praxis. And it's that set that allows you to assert that relationship, assert that role, and then assert rights as a result of that.
And so what's going to become really powerful about this, let's go back to our Amazon example before. So Amazon gets, and again, these are all hypothetical here.
Sure, yeah.
So Amazon gets issued an LEI. Amazon then goes and gets its vLEI. And I understand becoming a vLEI issuer qualified, it's called QVLEI issuer is on your roadmap. So sometime,
yes. So sometime later this year, we expect to, we hope to be a QVI. Yeah.
So you'll be able to issue vLEIs as well. And then Amazon then, once it has its LEI and its vLEIs, it will then have the ability to issue credentials to, say, its employees, or to its bots, or to its APIs, or to any number of the other physical or digital representors of the company.
Yep.
So for instance, if an Amazon delivery person shows up at my house, in theory, once all of this is implemented and rolled out into the market, I could pull out my phone, scan that code, or with the NFC chip, tap that code against their card, and I can then instantly cryptographically verify that that person actually is from the Amazon. They actually have the authority to do what they're doing with me, like possibly open up my garage and put the package in for me. And they in fact come from a company called Amazon, and all of that is going to be verifiable.
Absolutely. And even when you place the order, you can look at that the other way around. So when we started off, I spoke about this. How do you know that you're placing an order with actual Amazon? You could place an order using credentials, which says I'm only placing this order with this organization. And if you're not that organization, you can't redeem the order. So you can actually lock it from the start, and then eventually you can delegate authority to the delivery driver to be able to open your garage and leave the parcel there.
Yeah, and then ultimately that's going to then tie into too, does that company have the authority to use that phone number to be able to text message me?
Yep, absolutely.
Right? So what we've been talking about is going to provide us like a really almost Pangea level quantum isoquantic shift in the way we've been doing things today.
Yep, absolutely. The ability to move towards what I think Sam Smith would describe as an authentic web. Sam Smith is one of the architects behind where we are now with vLEIs. To move towards the authentic web, where you don't have to trust. Everything can be verified.
Right. I'm just taking a note on that one. That's good. All right. So really, really exciting. So what are the next steps? Like, so if someone listens to this and like, wow, this organizational identity thing's pretty exciting. This whole idea of marrying that with personal data and identity. And so that now we can have both secure, verifiable identity players on both sides. The originator, sender of a communication or message, the receiver, sender of the communication of that message. Once they both can verify each other, we're now getting this new basis of trust, this new means of building reputations. Where do people get started? So let's finish up the webinar, the conversation we're having, right? What are the next steps for people? Where do they get started, and how would someone start implementing this into their business?
Sure. So, I mean, first of all, to find out more about the LEI side, there's obviously all the information on the GLEIF site. In terms of putting this into business, in terms of right now enabling processes for delegation, today I think we're still working on classical identity methods for that. Tomorrow being a quarter away, 2 quarters away, so we're only talking 3 or 6 months, we're going to start seeing the first incarnations of verifiable delegation through the vLEI. So, you know, we're really excited to have these conversations with people who are looking at doing this now. And to be honest, those kind of timeframes fit into typical process type projects anyway. So, you know, we'd be absolutely delighted to have conversations with people about how they want to take advantage of the potential proven savings that have been recorded through doing this type of system, and how this is going to advance over the next 6-12 months. So
we're not talking years, we're talking months.
No, we're talking months. Absolutely. This is a real near-term change that we're going through based on systems and principles and processes that are well understood, well developed, and show fantastic returns for the users of them.
Well, and on that note, Simon, well, thank you very much. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I'll look forward to exploring this with you. And hopefully maybe later this summer, we can have another session and we can check see where we're at.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being here.
I really appreciate it.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.